Hello, everyone. I'm George Rosca.
And I'm Mark Schneider.
And we want to welcome you to today's episode 84 of Say What, where we talk about the threats to our children in the public school system, including, Mark, the parents' revolt across the nation as a result of these threats, what we at POK call the triple threat.
That's right, George. You know, we are actually recording this on Election Day, November the 8th, 2022. And by the time this is heard, the election will be over, and hopefully we will know the results of it. Although given today's state legislative election law climate, there's no guarantee that we're going to know all of the results in every state. But we thought this would be an apt time to sort of take a review, a scan of a new narrative that has formed in the country around parental rights. And there's a gentleman who writes for the National Review. His name is Nate Hochman, and he has done a great service by capturing this phenomena in an article that he recently published in the Daily Journal, a publication that we are big fans of here at POK. In fact, the name of the article is aptly called The Parents' Revolt.
Hallelujah. We need one of those.
We do indeed, and hopefully we're going to get one on Election Day. And so we thought that it would be helpful for our listeners as we walk through this article. We're going to deviate from it, but it's a good launching pad to talk about what's happened in the country and how it's affecting our elections.
And Mark, I also think this should be very encouraging for parents, because for those of us who have been on the front lines for a long time, or for those who are barely tuning in to the reality out there, understanding some of this very recent history and victories for parents, I think is going to be much needed good news.
I agree. So let's get into this, and we'll go back not too far in the distant past. Let's just go back to, as a reminder, to 2021. So this is last year, and what happened in Loudoun County, because that's kind of the epicenter for the whole parental rights movement in America, and some very specific events occurred there in Loudoun County, all centering around the arrest of a dad, a 48-year-old plumber by the name of Scott Smith. And do you remember why he was arrested?
Yes. I mean, his 15-year-old daughter was raped, and the school board denied the incident. And obviously he was livid. He went to the school board to give them a talk, right?
Yeah. In fact, this is what happened. 15-year-old daughter was actually raped in a restroom by a young man who is dressed as a girl. Mm-hmm. And she was accosted there and raped. And of course, like any dad, you would be apoplectic at your daughter being assaulted in this. I can't think, George, of a worse nightmare than having your daughter accosted in this way. And not just accosted in this way, but at a place that is supposed to be a safe zone, right? A public school, a girl's restroom at a public school, and this happens to this man's daughter. Mm-hmm. So naturally, he is angry, he's frustrated, he's contacted the authorities. Nobody's willing to do anything about this. So his only recourse now is to go to the public school hearing at a board meeting and air his concerns. And he was put off time and time again. In fact, the board itself denied that the incident even happened.
Say what?
Yeah. And this poor guy, obviously he's becoming more and more upset. And at one point he does become belligerent. You know, who wouldn't in a case like this when all his facts are being denied, even having existed. And so this poor man, George, was taken down. He was arrested. He was handcuffed. And the DA of the county actually charged him with disorderly conduct. They didn't charge the young man who committed the crime. In fact, what happened to him was they transfer him to another school in another district where another assault incident happened by the same young man. So it was a giant cover-up there in Loudoun County.
And what strikes me about this whole incident, Mark, is that it was only a couple years prior to this when the Me Too movement really started. So we should be believing all women, but why not believe this 15-year-old girl?
That's right.
And her dad.
That's right.
Why? Because the perpetrator happened to be a part of a protected class on the left that you cannot touch.
You cannot touch, and the school board didn't want to touch him, didn't want to have anything to do with this. They denied that the incident even happened. So when the media found out about this, and this was broadcast, it's a public hearing, so the news got out. George, as you know, it went viral. It went across the country, this whole incident. And all of a sudden, parents who had experienced similar, maybe not this radical, but had experienced similar kinds of things happening in their school districts, obtuse school board members that would not listen to their complaints when they voiced their concerns about comprehensive sex ed and radical sex ideology being taught in the public schools. And they were just told, well, you're a radical. You don't have any business telling us what to do in the school districts. That is really our purview. And it happened, George, as you know, at the same time there was a gubernatorial election going on in Virginia. Mm-hmm. And the Democratic shoo-in candidate at the time, his name was Terry McAuliffe, and he was way ahead in the polls. I mean, it was just sort of a slam dunk assumption that he was going to be the next governor. And at the same time, this, I guess, a hedge fund guy, he had no political experience whatsoever. He was a completely a political unknown. He was a businessman. But he was astute enough to pick up on the fact, his name was Glenn Youngkin, on the fact that, boy, this parental rights thing, this is capturing attention across the country. And then Terry McAuliffe made his fateful statement publicly. In a debate with Glenn Youngkin, he said, parents should leave education to the professional. That was the end of Terry McAuliffe's political career. And as we know from history, Glenn Youngkin won the gubernatorial election and immediately upon being elected started transforming school policy in the state.
Yes, and Virginia now has been for the last year really reaping the benefits of this Governor Youngkin. They've been changing their policy and I know that the parents there in Loudoun County have been making some even bigger waves that have inspired parents all over the country.
They really have. And this movement didn't stop in Virginia. It has swept across the country. Parents all over the nation are visiting school boards and voicing their concerns and running for elective office to try to change what's happening in our public schools. But, we should probably talk a minute, at least, George, about the roots of how our schools got in this condition where a young 15-year-old girl could be assaulted in a restroom by another child who's pretending to be a young woman. How could we have arrived at this situation in our country? And it goes back to a history starting from we've talked about this, the Frankfurt School. Yep. These radical Marxists from Germany who were invited during World War II to immigrate to the United States by John Dewey, who is known as the father of progressive education. They came to Columbia Teachers College, and then they spread out to Brandeis, Berkeley, UCLA, most of the top educational institutions, where they started teaching their critical pedagogy, their critical theory pedagogy, which divides the world, which divides the social order into oppressors and oppressed. You fall somewhere in that spectrum. It's a very antagonistic view of life in society, and particularly American life. And this one gentleman, his name is Paulo Freire, and he was a Brazilian philosopher and lawyer, and he wrote a famous book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed that was published in 1968. And this became a bestseller for centers of higher education. In fact, it became sort of a textbook for teachers' colleges to indoctrinate teachers about what they should be teaching in the social sciences. So, George, that was back in the 1960s when this occurred. And way back in 2003, two people, David Steiner and Susan Rosen, published a study examining the curricula of 16 schools of education. And they found that 14 of them, among the top-ranked institutions of the country, according to U.S. News and World Report, found that pedagogy of the oppressed was one of the most frequently assigned texts in their philosophy of education courses.
Say what? I mean, parents, you guys hear this? This is back in 2003. So from 1968 until 2003, this book has been consistently been teaching the teachers how to teach. And so obviously you get a critical mass of all of these teachers now, the new wave of teachers coming in from 2000, the 2010s, and now we're in the 2020s.
Yeah.
And this is what you get.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking like 50 years ago when all this stuff went down, the teachers, they have been indoctrinated themselves. And of course, they're bringing this to the public school system at large. And so what do we see today? Well, California's ethnic studies framework, which is required to graduate from high school, was teaching children to chant to Aztec gods of human sacrifice. Children are now instructed to become warriors for social justice. Critical race theory teaches kids to deconstruct their identity into either oppressed or oppressor classes. Republican bastions in America are not immune from these curriculums.
Yes.
In fact, as Nate Hockham points out in his article, in Frederick County, Maryland, the school district formed, quote, the Racial Equity Committee, who were charged with, quote, identifying discrimination or harassment, raising awareness of implicit bias, and eliminating or mitigating racial inequality or its effects across the entire school system. This is a heavily red county in the state of Maryland. We see the same thing in some of the flyover portions of the country, like Lansing, Kansas, where a left-wing activist campaign led to a CRT critical school board candidate, a 62-year-old, getting fired from her job after she'd had it for 42 years. So it's not just liberal California where this has happened. It's happened all across the country.
Yeah, and to a certain degree, parents, this is our fault. We've let the other side take over these institutions. We haven't been paying attention. We haven't been watching. We haven't been involved. And so now is the time. And a lot of what we talk about here at POK is how to get involved. So this has been a long culture war, Mark.
Long culture war. I mean, it goes back to the 1960s, as we stated. I remember the famous cases that took school prayer and Bible reading out of schools. Abington School District versus Schempp, that was 1962. Engel versus Vitale, around that same time frame. It wasn't too long after that we had the traditional marriage wars, Proposition 8 here in California, over what is the definition of marriage.
Yeah.
And that led to redefining marriage and the Obergefell, of course, decision. And now, George, what we've seen is the redefinition of language,
yes,
particularly the word sex that used to be associated with biology. But as we've seen, in large part to John Dewey, Frankfurt School, teachers' colleges, the word sex now has been redefined to mean sexual orientation, gender identity, increasingly not only in our school system, but in our civil rights laws.
And this is where things get really ugly because our rights of conscience are being lost to sexual rights. Parents, if you want to understand what sexual rights is, POK has a video, a short 10-minute video on what is sexual rights, and you get to really see how shrewd the other side is in trying to frame everything as a right. But then, downstream of, politics, right? We have these laws like in California, just, last month, Governor Newsom, at the end of September, he actually ended up signing SB 107 into law.
Yeah, the gender affirming care state now, California has become, where judges can rip children away from parents in other states who have been granted by the laws of those states to have full custody of a child. If there's a dispute between a parent living in California and one in another state, Texas, for example, as to the gender identity of that child. This just happened recently. An 8-year-old boy, a judge ruled, had to be given up by the parent that had custody of that child in Texas to come to California, George, to start getting puberty blockers and hormone replacement therapy. This is the state of where we are now in the United States. It's just unbelievable. But finally, George, parents are starting to understand what is going on. They're finally starting to awaken.
Yes.
In fact, George, Protect Our Kids was launched as a result of a law that passed in 2015, which mandated that radical sex ed be taught across the school systems in California, what's called comprehensive sexuality education. That's the whole reason that we formed. But we're not the only ones out there. There is a host, as you well know, of grassroots organizations that are trying their best to get the word out and to mobilize parents. And they're doing it, like Parents Defending Education out of Washington, D.C., Moms for Liberty out of Florida, which has chapters in virtually every state in the country now. And their mission is to train parents to run for school board.
Yes.
And they're doing a fantastic job of it. So this is very, very exciting to me.
Yes, and there are a lot of other ones. No Left Turn in Education, Moms for America, based out of Illinois. You have Massachusetts Informed Parents. You have Parents' Rights in Education out of Oregon and Washington, and they're creating chapters. I think they're in over 10 states now. So parents, you have so many options. Just search one of these up. Most likely there is one in your area. Join them.
And they're not hard to find. And, the other good thing that social media can be a real instrument of change for parents that want to protect their children. How many viral examples of video that we've seen from school board meetings where parents are raising their objections, or from radical teachers who are publicly on Twitter keeping curriculums and bragging about it from parents, or instances of videos from Drag Queen story hours, or parents highlighting radical school library books that they've discovered in their own backyards, or radical union members working for LGBT interests and not for children. And so parents are starting to mobilize. In fact, George, 17 states now have passed restrictions on CRT indoctrination, which is very exciting. School board recalls have now hit an all-time high. Even in our backyard, George, even in San Francisco, 3 school board members were recalled for radical sex ed positions.
Yeah, that was shocking. I never saw that one coming.
It's hard to see it coming, but it's good news. The other thing is that state legislatures are also starting to respond to the parent outcry. A good example is Florida's Don't Say Gay bill, which was favored by 19 points, despite the opposition it received even by the Disney Corporation. And all the bill did, George, was say that kids cannot learn about radical sex ed from grades kindergarten to 3rd grade. That's all you would not think that would be controversial.
Yeah.
but indeed it was. Texas, similarly, has passed laws combating CRT and renewing sensible civics education. Alabama has passed laws combating gender ideology in public schools. South Carolina's Governor Henry McMaster launched a, quote, comprehensive investigation into the presence of obscene and pornographic materials in the public schools in South Carolina. And of course, we have the example of Virginia with the governor there, Glenn Youngkin. But George, the fight continues.
Yes.
It goes on. Of course, we have the terrible example of the National School Board Association colluding with the Biden's Justice Department to tag parents who show up at school board meetings as, quote, domestic terrorists. In fact, they even invoked the Patriot Act to go after these parents. And teachers' unions, of course, continue to double down on restricting parental rights. In fact, the NEA is suing Rhode Island mom Nicole Solis for her open records request, which is her right by law to find out what the school districts are teaching her children.
Yeah, that one is crazy. And Nicole's such a brave mom. She's been on the offense against the NEA for a long time now. And they took her to court for it, which I don't think they have a standing.
It's unbelievable. So, George, parents are going on the offensive, which is a very healthy thing, particularly in this election cycle. They're asking first principle questions like, what is true American history? Mm-hmm. What is the real meaning of gender? What are the rights of parents? What is equity versus equality? Fundamental questions that now more and more parents are demanding answers to.
Yeah, they're catching on.
And they should get the answers to these questions. So, we're running out of time here. The fight is going to continue to go on, but it's a fight we think is worth having.
Most definitely. And so parents, if you're listening to this podcast, please go to our website, download our brochures, www.protectourkidsnow.org. And there are many videos. We've already mentioned some of them here. There's triple threat videos. What are sexual rights? You can also download our How to Start a Private School guide. On the front page of our website, there are two buttons in red. One is a speaker button. So if you want Mark or I to come to your church, to your parent group, to whatever organization you lead, to talk to you guys and explain what's going on in the public school system, we would be more than happy to be there and to set up a date. But there's also another very important button, donate button. And so we rely on donors to do this. However, our donor revenue is unpredictable. That's why we're inviting you to join our Guardian Angels program by making a recurring monthly donation. This will enable us to help more parents get their kids out of public schools. So please join us, partner with us, be part of this Guardian Angel program that we just launched right now, Mark. And we know that many parents will come alongside us and help us on the offense, as you mentioned.
Indeed.
We have to get on the offense. So parents, let's continue this revolt. Until next time.